Welcome back, everybody. It's a Borderline Genius. We're here with episode 12, which is absolutely fantastic. By way of introduction, my name is Andrew Williams. I'm a board game designer from Melbourne, Australia. I'm the designer of this little guy. It's an Australian football licensed game here, and really excited about this one that's coming to Australian retail really soon, an official Marvel Studios game. But we're not here to talk about any of that. Really thrilled this evening to be chatting with Chris Backe from Andro games, no box games, and also tabletop publishing as well. So for those who follow the forums, Chris is a regular contributor to our community. So very exciting to be broadcasting from Melbourne all the way into Birmingham. So yeah, Chris, very much thanks for your time and insights that you're going to pass on to our little bit growing community this evening.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Andrew.
Wonderful. So, mate, I know your journey in board games is really advanced. You're doing this full time now, as we just spoke a bit before about as well. You're doing multiple different paths, have a lot of different projects on the go. I'd say for a lot of us in this community, your lifestyle probably represents a bit of a dream for a lot of us, right? Where a big part of your time is allocated towards this pursuit. So before we chat about the now, I'm really keen to get your take on how you got into board game design and some of the earlier days that's led up to where you are today.
Sure. So I made my first board game when I was 12, and like you do when you're a kid, you create. That's what you know. It was called Armies and Legions, and I drew a grid on a big piece of cardboard, and I borrowed some of the pony beads from my mom's crafting cabinet, and so each pony bead was one unit, and each turn you could move each unit one space, and if your units were adjacent to another opponent's unit, you could do a battle, and each unit lets you roll one dice. So my 5-unit team versus your 3-unit team, I'm going to roll 5 dice versus 3 dice, wahaha, and you can spread them out. Now, I realize, of course, anyone listening to this that's played Risk in the last 70 years, I had basically, borrowed from Risk. I'd never played Risk before.
Mm-hmm.
I hadn't even heard of it, but, I had kind of created it. So I've always been kind of a creative type. I took piano lessons. I was in the choir in college, part of a barbershop quartet. I did some abstract art for a while. I was a photographer when I taught English in South Korea. And just did a lot of creative stuff in a lot of different creative places. And if you're listening to this and you're wondering how you go from dabbling in a creative thing to a professional full-time thing, understand that this is my journey that I've taken. Mm-hmm. Your journey can, will, and should look different. It doesn't need to take years to accomplish, and it will really be focused on your needs and your ability to provide value. People always talk about providing value or creating value, and this isn't just one thing. It's a consistent array of offerings. Think of any publisher, how they don't just publish one game and they say, right, job done. Never going to publish another game, just this one game. Now, if you're the Games Workshop, then maybe, but so I started game design more seriously in 2016. Mm-hmm. I'm living in Florida at the time, and I've been watching a lot of Will Wheaton's tabletop. Just watching how he approached modern board games. It looked like so much fun. He's got all the celebrities on to play games and really sell modern board gaming. Mm-hmm. So one day I had a game I felt confident enough to show. I learned about a playtesting event at this friendly local game store in Florida, mm-hmm. and just took it to the game shop. Now, there's a really weird thing that happens. You go into the game shop for the first time with your handmade prototype, and you see all these published games on the wall, and you go, who's going to want to play my hand-drawn prototype, hand-drawn permanent marker on foam board lines? I was like, who's going to want to playtest this? And you have to remember that some folks love playtesting new things. They see the games on the shelf. Yeah, I've heard of those. Those are fun, but what else is out there? What's new? Some people, like myself, just love seeing what's happening, new ideas. Mm-hmm. Some people love to hear or to have that sort of influence over new games. So whatever the rationale, you have a lot of opportunity to take advantage of their time and their energy to give you the advice you need to make your game better. That first playtest was called Minions of Mayhem, and it was rough. It worked in some places, it didn't work in other places. The playtesters were kind, they gave some good feedback, and I said, well, this is a weekly event, so if you guys are going to be here next week, I'll bring a next version. They did, and I did. So we playtested for a few more times. Eventually I shelved that game. It wasn't really going the direction I wanted it to go. I also have been an expat / digital nomad from 2008 really to the present. So
Sure.
today I live in Birmingham, England, and have for about a year and a half now. But from, let's say, 2016 to 2022, as a nomad, we'd move around every few months.
Mm-hmm.
So when you move around and you don't really have a home community, playtesting was hard.
Mm.
And this is the part of the journey that really stalled for me. If you already have a playtesting community, if you're not moving around a bunch, you're going to find playtesting a lot easier than I did the first 5 years of design. But I learned how to teach a game quickly to folks that weren't necessarily interested in spending a lot of time learning a game. I specifically made a game that I could teach to folks without speaking.
Interesting.
So, and part of that was because this was Athens, Greece at the time, and a lot of the locals, they speak Greek, but they don't speak English. I speak English, but I don't speak Greek. So unless I want to translate each and every card or all the rules every time I make a new version, I need to find another way to teach this game. So the game I made was called Spin the Banana. It's a party programming game where you're playing cards to protect you from the banana that's pointing at you. So just hand gestures and showing the cards and spinning a plastic banana, that made that really easy to show how the game is played. So things picked up a bit more after the first few games got signed, and 2020, when all the lockdown started, was actually a really big career turning point.
Sure.
So all the lockdown started, and I was in Warsaw, Poland at the time. And I'm excited. We just arrived on a Saturday, and on a Monday, I'm at a board game cafe doing playtesting there from an event I heard about on Meetup. Mm-hmm. And in talking with the staff there, they were like, "Oh, you're a designer. You should go to this designers meetup on Wednesdays, also in town." All right, awesome. So I got 2 times a week to playtest with solid folk. Mm-hmm. The Polish group was good. They're mostly young Polish guys. They spoke English well enough, so no language barriers there. Yay, awesome. So playtesting twice a week, and then one Wednesday I show up to the building where this designers group met, and there's no one around. The lights are off, the doors are locked. I'm like, okay, is this the practical joke they throw on newbies? Is there a surprise party? No, no one's shown up. Yeah, so 45 minutes on, no one's around, nothing's happening. So I walk out the building, the security guard gives me this weird, "What are you doing here?" look. And I get home, and the next day, the NCAA men's college basketball tournament in the U.S. had been canceled because of this new thing called coronavirus. And that's when all the crap hit the fan. So all of the playtesting stuff I had really enjoyed had stopped, like record scratch, complete stop.
Radio silence.
Along with everything else. Yeah. So all of this lockdown caused kind of a vacuum. A real world group in the U.S. called Remote Playtesting started an online group called Remote Playtesting. Mm-hmm. And they basically took their real world folks that met in New York and then turned that into a virtual Discord server. And I was like, I love that format. They came up with a really cool format, and but I just wish it was on European time zones because I'm in Poland at the time.
Yeah.
So I ended up meeting up with Ian Brocklebank, who's in Leeds, England right now, and together we said, well, we can start a group that's kind of like remote playtesting, but just based on European time zones. Mm-hmm. So we started virtual playtesting in 2020, and we basically said, yeah, come on out. We'll get your games into a virtual format, just the thing we can play, and we'll meet once a week, which later became twice a week, and we were off to the races. Virtual playtesting now still meets twice a week, 3 times a week if you count Wednesdays, and 1,800 members.
Yeah, wow, fantastic.
Yeah. So getting this opportunity to playtest now 4 or 5 days a week really kickstarts and accelerates your ability to make changes quickly and not just, okay, well, I'll make the changes and I'll bring it to the next month's group and I've got a lot of time. And, things change priorities when it feels like what you need to do is so far away. When I say we're going to get to playtest this on Friday, it's Tuesday now. You've got a few days to make some changes, but you have a deadline.
Correct.
For some folks, that notion of a deadline saying, get this done by this time or else, gives you that sort of impetus to move things forward. So, so playtesting a lot more. But to come back to this as a kind of a lesson for other folks, I started virtual playtesting out of a need to playtest myself. And as I was not the only person to have this need, I reached out to other folks that said, I also want to playtest. And this group became about designers helping designers playtest games. And you get a lot of great feedback from folks that are also designers. They know how to test a game. They know how to break a game. More than a few designers out there love breaking games or trying unusual strategies to see what happens if you do something suboptimally. So, yeah.
Fantastic. What a wonderful introduction. I think for me, there's so many takeaways, Chris, from that opening, but so much you've achieved in 7 years. I think even back to my journey, right, where I first had my prototype for Footy Feud back in 2014. It was out in the market by 2017. But I think you really talk about there how you can accelerate your own development curve, and really one of your key signposts to achieve that has been a really frequent habit of playtesting. And just the more you can iterate and get that feedback, I suppose would I be right in saying that in your mind as well, that every time you do a playtest, if you pick up that a variable has to change or that something is broken, on your next playtest, what permission or what pressure do you put on yourself to fix that broken element versus kind of let it stew or let it ruminate? It might take 2, 3, 4 playtests to completely fix it, but how do you then best reset your mindset as to what you want to achieve from the next one when you realize something isn't perfect, which is a lot of the time for us, right? When things aren't perfect.
Yeah. Well, actually, yesterday was a great example of that. I had made a game called Trading Up, which is an auction bluffing game. And about 2 minutes into the teach of this new version I'd made but hadn't tested, I realized that A, I couldn't remember the rules. B, looking at the Google Docs whilst trying to teach the game, I was wondering to myself, why did I make this change? What was I thinking? And then C, realized, well, this won't work if we do it this way. And then I said, okay, well, I believe the Brits say, sod it, let's go to a different game. So I said, okay, I'm going to go to a different game now, just to try to respect the playtester's time here. And so it was kind of a disaster, but it happens sometimes. So we come back to this idea that when I do a playtest, I look at it like a scientific experiment.
Yes.
We are following the classic scientific method here of iterating, testing, taking notes, changing things, and coming back to experimenting. Which means that if we run the same experiment over and over again, we'll get different results with different people, but the core stuff of the game is unchanged. Therefore, I see it as the most important thing to playtest a new version of the game every time. I don't see it as particularly helpful to test the same game 20 times with 20 different people, because if I see something wrong with the system, 20 different people are going to tell me basically the same thing. It's one thing when one person has an opinion or says, well, I think this part is overpowered, underpowered. When a second person at a different event or a different test, a different version, the second person saying the same thing, that's really when it's time to sit up and listen. And it's when they're like everyone's got opinions, but when it comes down to this is overpowered, this is subjectively better than this other thing. But basically, the habit to form is every time you play test, bring the best current synchronized version of that game.
Yeah,
Don't bring the same version over and over again, because we all know the definition of insanity.
absolutely. You mentioned then as well how for you kind of like a second piece of feedback or a second, yeah, I guess a second bit of feedback validates that it's a proof point as opposed to an opinion. For maybe designers who aren't experienced as yourself and don't know when to trust their gut, what counsel would you give to them with when they should have an understanding on whether something is systematic or whether it's an opinion, do you think? Is it that second test, or is it, by the third, the fourth, or what's the right moment to actually own it that something needs to change?
Well, there's always something that needs to change. I can take a game that I've signed,
Hmm.
I could literally take a published game that I've already made, it's fully boxed, it's ready to go, and I could still find things I want to change about that. So understand a game is never done. It's just shipped.
Yeah.
I have completed my work. The publisher has completed their work. We've put in a box. We've shipped it. You can and will find things to change, even in published games. This happened at Essen last year. I was doing it. I was enjoying a demo with someone, and I was thinking to myself, okay, I have notes. But again, this is a published game, already in the box, already printed, already designed. They don't need any more notes. So for you and your projects, you'll always have things to tweak and things to test. At some point, these things become minor things.
Yes.
I wish I could make the font on this card bigger. Okay.
Yeah.
That's an easy stuff. That's easy stuff compared to this entire system feels broken. I come back to goalposts and experiences. So a goalpost, to use a sport term, is the place you're aiming for. For example, I might aim for 20 to 30 minutes, 2 to 6 players, ages 8 and up. I might say I want my
very,
game
very similar to what's on my packaging. So that's a good example to use.
So that's one example of a goalpost. It might be I want this game to be about Vikings exploring the Arctic. I might say I have a mechanical goalpost. I want this game to be about worker placement. So I have this. I'm setting a course towards this goalpost with these things in mind. And as I'm designing, I might say, well, what if the theme changes from Vikings exploring the Arctic to pirates on the seven seas? So at that point, one of the two things needs to change. Either I change my goalpost and I change course to this new direction, or I kind of reaffirm to myself why I'm on this specific course. Why do I want this theme? Why do I want this mechanic? And this might come back to, well, this is the kind of game I enjoy playing, which is valid, or it might come back to the experience you're trying to create for the players about to play it. What kind of experience do you want them to have? What emotions do you want them to have? Board games can be and often are an emotional roller coaster. You can make people feel happy, feel sad, feel ecstatic, feel joy, feel frustration. And these are all valid things to feel when the theme and the mechanics are causing things to happen. So come back to what experience do you want players to have? How do you steer them through things, whilst keeping the game in the place you want it to stay?
Absolutely.
Goalpost and experience.
I think that's fantastic feedback. And at the risk of oversimplifying or putting it in my own words, like goalpost can link to the mechanics, or goalpost kind of the compass that you're aiming for. But I think it's very easy to get caught up in mechanics and lose that feeling. The feeling is really critical, right? And that's a bit less X's and O's, or a bit less of, oh, this system feels broken, or this part was a bit clunky. That's a bit like fundamentally playing games is, to your point, an experience, right? So like, what do you want that experience to be? And if you can't articulate that very well, then fundamentally your goalpost probably isn't as fleshed out as well as what it could be either.
Yeah. And one thing I'll also mention now is that, especially for newer designers, I want you to choose your own ambition. What a lot of newer designers say, well, I just want to make a game for my friends and I to play. And that's a totally valid level of ambition. That's a perfectly acceptable place to be. And if your game is, if you make 5 copies of the game, you sell a couple to your friends and your family, that is a totally valid level of ambition. You have made the game, and whether you get it professionally produced or a friend helps with the artwork, that's great. And that's job done.
100%.
You can play that game and for the rest of your life, and that's it. Some people want to make 100 copies and take them to the local flea market or consign them to local game shops. That's a totally valid level of ambition. Some people want to kickstart and go to China and learn all about the wonderful process of shipping, manufacturing, distribution, and customs fees, and sell a few thousand copies that way. That is a totally valid level of ambition. Some people want to pitch their games to publishers and get them on store shelves in 30 countries around the world. That is a totally valid level of ambition. That is not the only level of ambition to aim for. There are many other levels. You might say your goal is to win a Spiel des Jahres, the German Game of the Year award. Totally valid level of ambition. What we need to do to get to each of these steps is very, very different. So in much the same way that, to come back to the goalpost again, where you want to end up is as you would on any hike or if you're climbing any mountain, you know where you're trying to get to, so how do you get there?
Absolutely. No, and I think for me, that mindset really resonates with me. I know that different creators take a different approach for sure, but I always like to have an idea of what the end point is.
Exactly.
Almost to borrow that analogy that you mentioned before of Vikings exploring the Arctic versus Pirates on the Seven Seas. They're different goalposts, right? If you're exploring the Seven Seas versus if you're exploring the Arctic, you need different tools, you need different equipment, you probably need different clothes, you need a whole heap of different things, right? So to keep that analogy going, if you do want to win a Game of the Year award, if you want to be stocked in major retail, if you want to have a fun game that can complement your local games night with your friends and family, again, then what has to be true, right? And that's probably the build that I'd encourage to go back on goalpost and experience, like what has to be true in order to meet your ambition, and then chart the course and see how you go.
Yeah, and that level of ambition can and will be different for different games. You might make a small party game that gets signed to a publisher. Awesome. They put some work into the art. They pay you some royalties. Awesome. You then make a smaller, you then make a bigger game for friends and family. It sells 100 copies. Awesome. That level of ambition can be different by the game. And I think what's the most important for newer and even experienced designers to realize is that this can change with your life circumstances as well. As you have more time to dedicate to things, you can change your ambition level. As you have less time, maybe you say, well, instead of going a Kickstarter route, maybe I'll partner with someone else to create the Kickstarter version, or I don't have time for this right now, but I can carve out some time in 3 months. Or I can pitch this to a publisher who will do the development and so on. But I still need to get that game to a state where it's ready to be pitched to a publisher. I can't show them just an idea, So time is, everyone's got the same amount of time, but so many people have commitments beyond just what they want to do themselves. And to that, I submit, you are what you prioritize. This comes back to really boring and lame stuff like healthy eating and healthy living and being active. But if it's something you think is genuinely important, it wins out over other things. Instead of just finding the thing that's the most convenient way to do things, or the path of least resistance, you find the thing, your goalpost again, and you work towards that. If your goal is to lose weight, everyone knows how to lose weight. Very few people actually do that. Eat healthier. work out more, be active more, do things that make you sweat, go to a gym. Now this is not medical advice, obviously, but this is the stuff
an
you
example
already
of wise.
intuitively know.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's a matter of prioritizing it. So, like right after this call, I'm going to go to the gym. It's on my list
Hmm.
today. You know, so
How good is that? Yeah. Fantastic. In addition to that and having a to-do list, when it comes to games, how do you prioritize? 'Cause I know you have a lot of different projects on the go. You have three different games arms. You work with publishers. You self-publish. So how do you go about them prioritizing? And I'd say my build to that question isn't just prioritizing for the now, but also prioritizing over your different time horizons as well, knowing that you work on projects of varying complexity.
yeah. So a lot of my personal setup comes back to priorities and deadlines. A great example: we're recording this in September, and Essen is less than 3 weeks away now, which is scary to think about. So going to a convention is a great example of a hard deadline. I cannot
Mhm.
change this deadline. I have to make sure all my stuff is ready to go, or when I get there and I'm ready to pitch a publisher, I won't have a game to show them. And it's a
Mm.
very bad look. So I want to have the game ready to show. Um, so games that are already ready to go, they haven't really been changed much. I will print off the version to show, the
Mhm.
day or two before. But right now, as a great example, my priority is to get my sell sheets in order, make sure they're all
Yep.
up to date,
Yep.
make sure that my website has the current version of the sell sheets, and get some other things done to ensure that I'm pitching people and getting all that done. Now, some pitching is already done. There's a bit more to do.
Mhm.
Um, but it comes back to understanding that deadline. Once Essen is done,
Mhm.
then I can come back to I can get out of pitching mode, if you will, and come
Mhm.
back to design mode for a little while.
Mhm.
So after Essen, the next one for me is going to be probably Nuremberg. That's
Yeah.
January 30th to February 3rd. For those who don't know, Nuremberg, Germany is the home of one of the largest board game fairs, not named Essen, but it's not open to the public. It's for designers, for inventors, for professionals in the world. And if you're watching this, it might be you. So this is a great chance to meet publishers without 13,000 people milling about trying to buy games. Their
Mm.
sole purpose for being there is to make business-to-business connections. So, yeah, January 30th to February 3rd, and it's a major trade show for everything from toys to games to clothes to plush figures. There's like one
Yeah.
big hall for plush stuff. There's one hall for party stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. It's incredible. Yeah. I haven't been myself, but I've heard the scale of it. And we talk about goalposts. There's a goalpost in mind one day to be there. Might not be next year, but
Yeah,
yeah, hopefully not in the not too distant future.
yeah. So hard deadlines like that can give you a thing on the horizon to work towards.
Mm.
Allow me to call them soft deadlines, where you are in control of the deadline.
Hmm.
You have said, I want to get this thing done by Friday. I don't personally feel the need to use an accountability partner or anything like that. You have the control and the time and hopefully the self-discipline to set a reasonable deadline to give you the time you need to do it. It's one thing to say, oh, I'll have the entire game completely play tested and ready to go by Friday, and it's Tuesday. There's no chance of that.
That's very
So
tough. Yeah.
set the correct sort of reasonable goal for that. By Friday, I want to ensure the rule book and the cards are on the same version. They're synchronized with each other.
Mm. Yeah.
Just as an example. Now, or if you say, I need to have a version of this game to play test by Friday because I'm going to, well, that's an example of a hard deadline. Yeah. So I connect to deadlines for me personally. You might find deadlines work well for you, or you might find having a motivation partner, accountability partner, someone that can remind you of these things is fine. But this is your game. This is your career. This is your business you are building.
Hmm.
You are the primary driving factor behind all of these things. That motivation needs to come from you, not your accountability partner. not your friend, not your coach, not
Hmm.
that person who you're talking about at the bar. This is your thing. Make it your way. Be in control.
It's really good feedback. And I think that, like, you spoke there about motivation as well. How important is setting achievable milestones and seeing that your project is progressing forward as opposed to lagging behind in order to sustain those motivation levels?
Okay, so I mean, obviously, playtesting is a great way of seeing the delight and the
Hmm.
frustration on people's faces. That is your, I look at playtesting as a litmus test of this experiment you're running. How do they respond to things? You know,
Yeah.
if you've ever done a playtest and you ever see someone, they're sitting back and they're looking at their phone and they're tapping their phone. It's not their turn, right? There's nothing for them to pay attention to, so they
Yeah.
can kind of tune out. Now, it's one thing if someone's on call and they have to take a quick call or whatever, but one thing I'm looking at is body language.
Mm,
Are they on the edge of their seat, leaning forward? You
mm,
know, are they bantering and kind of
yeah.
talking smack with their other friends? What are they
Yeah.
doing during play that is, or like, obviously there's getting into the theme of the game, but there's also the game is encouraging
Mm,
the
interaction.
experience you want to create. Exactly, yeah.
Yeah.
So player
Yeah.
interaction and interesting decisions are two things I always try to come back to with my games. Interesting decisions are multiple ways to go that are both correct and valid strategies.
Mm, mm,
Um, and player interaction because we're here to play with other humans. We're
yes.
not just here to play with cardboard bits and plastic pawns. I'm here to engage with the other people at the table.
Part here. Yeah, I think that, like, that all makes a lot of sense, right? I think that, like, from my perspective, it's interesting you come back to the word interactive. That's a key word that I'm kind of using in my communication now. And you talk about Nuremberg and some of the big German festivals. My wife very kindly got me Klaus Tuber's, the great late Klaus Tuber's memoirs on my birthday last year. And his three key words that resonated with me with why he said Catan was such a great success was that games are highly variable, games were highly interactive, and games were constructive, which my games aren't necessarily on the constructive part. Like, you can lose what you have accumulated as opposed to Catan and victory points. I guess you never lose a victory point. So yeah, that interactive part certainly really resonates with me, and that ties back really nicely to a thread that you mentioned earlier about the experience, right? Like, you want to make sure that the experience isn't just when it's somebody's turn; it's what's their overall engagement, and
Mm-hmm.
often what aren't they saying as well, right? Like, I think as creators, when we do attend the play test, we can get a pretty good feel as to what it's like, but look beyond the words, right? Like, look beyond what they're saying, capture that
Yeah,
whole, what are they feeling? What's the essence of what they're feeling? And is that in line with your expectations and what you're hoping to create out of this experience for these
yeah.
people?
And some folks are really good at elucidating their feelings both as they play and when they're giving feedback. And part of what our job is as designers, I think, is empathy.
Mm,
To remember to see things from other people's perspective, but more than that, try to tap into what they're thinking as they're thinking it. You know, um, One common question I try to phrase in different ways is basically, when do you feel like you're making strategic decisions rather than
mm,
just learning the game? So I'll use the term mechanical competency to say
yes.
I am playing the game correctly. I'm not
Mm,
cheating accidentally or intentionally. I am independently taking a turn on my own without being nursed or overly guided through the process. Once I have mechanical competency, then I can start going for strategic competency. I'm playing the
mm,
game with intent, with
yes.
strategy. It may
Yeah.
not be the best strategy or the correct strategy, but it's one I've chosen. It's not random. Um, and as I get better at the game, I can learn which strategies are better. I can make longer term strategies. Instead of looking at my own player
Mm,
board, the central area, I can also now look at what my opponents are doing and respond to their play. But I start from mechanical competency, then I get strategic competency, and then I have this sort of rest of the world You
Mm,
you
mm.
start small, like then maybe you notice yourself when you play yourself. You start by looking at your own thing, and only then can you kind of broaden out to see what else can I influence.
How then, when you're assessing a playtest, do you assess how well you've landed the strategic competency? Because I guess the mechanical part, as you said, you used the expression before, like if a system's broken, then it needs to be addressed. You can probably understand whether players are picking up what you want them to put down. But that strategic level, and whether that learning loop is happening, where players are
Mhm.
understanding different trade-offs, they're thinking short term versus long term, it might be risk versus reward. Yeah, how do
Mhm.
you best assess that angle to it?
Um, the simple answer is it's a bit different in the virtual setting versus the real world, whether it's designers versus players. But really, I'm just watching people as carefully as I can to see how are they looking at their cards. If I
Hmm.
see someone, just for example, picking up a card, reading it, putting it down, and then 2 minutes later they're picking up the same card, rereading the thing they've already read, putting it down. Now I'm going to put on my Sherlock Holmes hat here for a minute here. Why would you do that? Is it because there's an important rule on here that you need to reference frequently, or so it could also be something hasn't quite sunk in? There's a
Mm,
lot of things to look at, and this is one piece of information you can easily refer back to.
hmm.
Um, when people sound excited about their turn, when people feel like I've got a plan now and I'm going to execute this plan and I've set myself up on this turn to do this really cool thing now, and now I'm going to move here, which lets me do this, then I'm going to do here, which lets me battle you, and then this happens. And boy, that's a good feeling when your plan, your strategy comes together.
Yes.
So you see some of that. You like I even had one person that was literally like pen drop almost,
Yeah.
you know, on the table. I mastered my plan. I got this. So this feeling of confidence, this feeling of I am making these moves correctly and strategically, um, that comes through with people's body language, but also with how they're playing.
Hmm.
You as a designer should know and can see what a good move might be, or what a great move might be.
Hmm.
It's not your place to tell someone, well, you could have done it this way,
Mm,
you
correct.
know.
Yeah.
So your job is to observe and assist as necessary, but also to keep the game on track, on rails, if you will. If someone's about to make a very poor move, I might warn them against that, or
Mm,
I might remind someone of a rule that's on the horizon. So at the end of the game, remember, for example, your money is worth money is worth 1 point.
hmm.
You know, I'll mention that during the teach, but I'll also mention it again during the mid game. So when you're about to buy this thing, I might say, okay, yep, that's a valid strategy. You can
Yeah.
do that. It's one thing to remember. You may want to balance that purchase versus the point value of the money or
Yeah.
whatever
Yeah.
else. The whole
Yeah.
goal here
Yeah.
is to remind people of the choices they're making. They don't just have this one. This is a valid strategy, but there are others.
Absolutely. Reminding of those key trade-offs. I think I was at an event that our Melbourne incubator community ran, which was fantastically organised here last Saturday. I think that the organizer Jonathan spoke through really well that it's okay to remind players how to play, but not how
Yeah,
to strategize. Like if it's a rule
yeah,
reminder, fantastic, right? Because you want to make sure it's equitable. Everyone remembers how to play and how the game works, but you're not
hmm,
saying, as you said, like, oh, you should think about doing this or strongly consider doing this action here. That's for them to understand that that's that
yeah.
strategic competency coming through.
And I want to, yeah, and I think this is a really important point because this comes back to empathy. Um,
Mm,
Never assume a playtester remembers all of the rules.
mm,
Never, ever assume. If they played the game 50 times, if they played it more than you have, never assume they remember the rules. I
yeah.
do, as best as I can, a full teach of the game each and every time I teach it.
Mm,
Doesn't matter if they played it before, because if I've changed stuff, and I always have, then their knowledge from the previous games won't be as helpful as it used to be. You might say,
correct.
oh, well,
Yeah.
last time I played, I had two actions instead of three, so my strategies and my tactics were based on that. Well, I've changed it now, friend.
Mhm.
That means the knowledge you thought you had is not as useful now. It also
Mm.
means that to prevent you from playing the game the old way, I have to teach you and then remind you, reinforce you what the new way is.
Mm.
You know? And what this also does is it lets a new player feel like they're entering the game on an equal footing, instead of giving the new player the abbreviated version of the teach. Oh yeah, you know how to play. The only thing I changed here, you get 2 turns instead of 3 now.
Yeah,
What's the new player supposed to do with that? Okay, 2 actions instead of 3. What does that mean to me?
correct. There's no
No.
context,
And
right? It's a specific detail without context.
exactly. So,
Yeah.
yeah, always giving the full teach. For newer players, I definitely try. I always try to have a reference card.
Hmm.
And if I were remaking Uno, I would have a reference card for Uno.
Mm.
I do
What
not
would that
think
reference
there's
card
any
say on it
game.
in particular?
Um, Shed cards, get rid of cards to win.
Hmm.
Remember to say Uno, or you'll lose 3 cards.
Yeah.
I might, if there's any, if this version is anything other than like the draw 2, draw 4.
Hmm.
Once you've seen it on the card, you know it. But again, this reference card is for referring to help keep things in your head, not to keep it all in. Yeah. Don't assume everyone remembers everything. The reference card is placed to look at, to help you remember things to reference. It's not a full teach of the game, but
Yeah.
yeah, if there's a variant, if there's an IP attached to it, then
Hmm.
whatever special rules have changed. Love
Yeah.
Letter,
Yeah.
small elegant game as it is, has a reference card to help you remember what these different roles do. If a
Mm.
micro game that you can pick up and play in 5 minutes can have a reference card, I think virtually every game should.
Yeah. Yeah. Strongly consider it. Absolutely. I think for a lot of our watchers and listeners, you said Essen is coming up. Also here in Australia, we have PAX in Melbourne, which is super exciting.
Yeah.
And I know that a lot of game designers are going to be looking to teach their game. So I'm really keen to get your thoughts on what makes a successful teach and how
Okay.
comprehensive do you go versus, maybe it's a good place to start. How comprehensive do you go up front, or how do you drip feed information systematically that enables somebody to pick up and play, but then maybe doesn't overwhelm them at the same time?
Sure. So I'll give you kind of the structure, and then I'll go into a real world example here.
Hmm.
So I try to start from who are you? First and foremost, who are you representing?
Hmm.
So in Bug Bounty, you are all hackers that are protecting your systems and hacking the systems of others.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay? So this is a bit of world building here. Think of any movie you've ever watched. The first couple minutes, they tell you the year, the place,
Yeah.
if there's any sort of extenuating circumstances, and this
Hmm.
helps to set the thing. And that's the next thing I do. After telling you who you are, where and when are you?
Okay. Yeah.
Not every game is on Earth. Not every game is set today, 2023, in the 21st century.
Yeah.
So in Bug Bounty, you're all hackers trying to hack each other. It's
Hmm.
the present day in our classic sort of computer-connected world. It could be set a decade in the future for all I care, but you know, giving this sense of place and time helps to firm up the who are you.
Hmm.
So
Yeah.
if this is a house we're building, the who are you is the foundation. The where and when are you is the next layer there.
Yeah.
Um, so from there, I'll go into what you're trying to accomplish.
Hmm.
So what do you want to do? So you want to hack people. You
Yeah.
are also trying to prevent people from hacking you. You want to make money and collect hack cards, and you want to bluff other people, and you'll want to keep up your reputation as best as you can, because these will all
Mhm.
score you points at the end of the game.
Yeah.
So who are you, where and when are you, what are you doing, along with why are you doing it,
Hmm.
and then we get to the how.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I do put them in that specific order as best as I can, because this is all kind of building on each other,
All
so that
ladders up.
by the time we get to the how, you've already kind of built up in your head an intuitive sense of what this world is. If we were pirates sailing the seven seas in the year 1607, You probably don't have a ray gun. You're not getting beamed up into space, most likely. If you are, then that's fine. But
Yeah.
taking advantage of people's previous knowledge really helps here. I'm going to hack you. That means I'm going to be in the world of computers. I'm going to use computer type terms. So who are you? Where and when are you? What are you doing? Why are you doing it? And then how are you doing it? Okay, so in Bug Bounty, you're all trying to hack each other, and you're going to score points by doing that. On your turn, you'll draw 2 cards. They can be money cards or hack cards. Once you've done that, you'll take a couple of optional actions. You can patch a system. So you take a face-up token, discard it out of play, draw a new token, put it face down on your board. That's optional. That has a cost, but it's an optional action. You can discard a hack card from your hand to gain the reputation on the card. If you do that, you'll gain some reputation, which will move you up that particular track. Or you can spy, which is to spend 1 reputation to peek at the tokens of other players. So we're getting into the how you actually play.
Into how you play.
Started from
Yeah.
Exactly. So once you spied, you can then play a hack card face down in front of another player, and you're going to make a claim about what you're hacking. You're a hacker hacking other people, so I'm going to take my hack card from my hand, and I'm going to put it face down in front of you, and I'm going to say, I'm going to hack your database if you don't pay me $5 million. And I might even ham this up for the teach just because it's fun. And everyone can see in their hand they've got money cards and they've got hack cards. I'm going to use my hack cards to extract money from people if I can. Now this is the simplest version of the core loop, right? Over time, I'll mention, okay, so this starts a negotiation. You can either say, well, would you accept $3 million? Or you could say, oh, I'm not worried about this system. You can hack that system. One of 2 things will happen. Either I buy that card from the hacker, pay some money, get the card, or I let the hack happen, and then we resolve that, and some bad stuff might happen. But those are the 2 outcomes. Now, once I've taught this simplest version of that core loop, I'll also pepper in some other ideas here. Okay, so this is a negotiation game. You don't have to just exchange money. You could also exchange hack cards. You could say, I'll hack you if you don't give me 2 of your hack cards from your hand.
Yeah, absolutely.
So we start with a simple core loop, and once they've got that, explain some of the other things you're allowed to do in the game.
Wonderful. I think that the really key part there, and it's a key word, and it's one that we covered it in our group on Saturday, which is a great frame up as well, was what's the core loop or what's the core mechanics? I think, again, for a lot of us who are going to be showcasing games and teaching games and upcoming conventions, be able to distill like what's the core essence of the game, and then going back to your earlier comment, then how does that shape the experience? Like really what's core should come back to what's the ultimate kind of mechanical competency that you want somebody to have that enables them to have enough strategic competency, maybe not all strategic competency, that fundamentally allows them to have the experience that you're wanting them to have. Would that be a fair assessment of what you would see core being, Chris?
Yeah, I see the core loop just being obviously core loop, just the things you're doing every turn, and also emphasizing where it's necessary the order of operations. So, for example, I talked about there's 3 optional actions that you could do. Now, these, strictly speaking, don't need to be done in a specific order. You could do option A, then option B, then option C. But what I have in the rules right now is I've got them in a specific order here, and I want to control that order. I want you to say either, yes, I'm taking up action A, or I'm not doing it. Then I want you to choose action B or not. And then I want you to choose action C or not. These are 3 optional actions, but they're done in this specific order. Strictly speaking, I don't need to do it that way. But by doing it that way, by taking the order of operations out of the core loop, I am saying instead of there being lots of combinations here, there's just one. So we come back to this idea that to make the game simpler and to prevent possibly to prevent confusion, I define and dictate that order of operations. So it's the most intuitive way, but it's also potentially just the one way you always do it. And repetition builds that sort of competency.
Wonderful. And that goes back to the experience that you want your gamers to have. And in this case, you want it to them be able to pick up and play. You don't want it to be a bottleneck in their understanding.
Exactly. And of course, these are three potential optional actions that is just one part of one person's turn. So, with three different things, I've got 6 different combinations here.
Yeah.
And if I get hung up on, well, should I patch first and then spy and then do this other thing, or should I spy first? It doesn't actually matter. It's all happening at essentially the same time. I might even, and this was the way I playtested it yesterday, I might even say, okay, well, these are three optional actions you can do, but you can only do one per turn. So that would even further limit the decision space. Yes. So when you get to your turn, there's probably one of these things you'll want to do more than the others. Now, this might be too limiting. I don't know. I'll have to think about it more. But just this idea of compressing decision space is always helpful. Reducing the number of combinations and permutations to work through. A great example of this, imagine, I'm just going to grab some cards here. So I'm just going to take 5 cards from deck of cards here. And imagine you're told you can play these cards in any order. Okay?
Yeah.
So with 5 cards in hand, and anyone with this math is already figuring out where this is going, I can play card 1, card 2, card 3, card 4, card 5. Or card 1, card 2, card 3, card 4, card 5. There's lots of different ways to order these cards.
Yeah.
And so the more cards you have like this, the more permutations there are. And naturally, I want to evaluate them all. Which of these ways to order these cards is the best? Now I've sat here for 20 minutes figuring out which order is the best. I don't know. There's too many options.
Yeah.
Now, if this is a bigger, heavier game, that's fine. So something as simple as you've got 3 cards in hand. So we actually go from, I think it's 15 combinations with 5 cards.
Correct.
Take up 2 cards. You now have 6 possible combinations.
6. Yeah.
And this is a much more approachable sort of world. Also, if we reduce that decision space even more, this card only it gives you money. This card lets you spend money. I'm probably going to get the money first, then spend the money.
True. Yeah.
So that reduces the action space a little bit. Now, maybe there's a card that lets you draw another card, so temporarily you got one more option. But you see where this is going. I'm trying to reduce that,
absolutely,
compress that decision space to a few specific decisions I want you to have.
100%. And I think the comment that you made before is really a critical one for me. It depends what type of experience and you want your players to have. Like, if it was a heavier game where this was a core mechanic, the trade-off of what choice to make first in what order, if that's a core mechanic of the game, then fantastic. Maybe you need to incorporate a way how to put that into the teaching. But here it's not what part to go in first, adds too much complexity relative to the benefit. It's not core. It's detracting from the experience you want your players to have. So hence, your now strategic and creative challenge is how do you condense that to something that still has enough strategic competency, but is in line with the more simple game that you're looking to create.
Yeah. Now, one thing that I'll also note here, it's also very easy for designers to get into this rabbit hole of playtesting and other designs. Step outside of that world, come back to published games. Not just the ones you know and love, but go out and learn some new published games. Go to your friendly local game store, your game cafe, wherever you can pick up new games. Learn them from the rules, because this is the experience you're having as a player, and there'll be parts of this you want to take into account when you're designing games for when your game hits the shelf a few years from now, and someone else is doing basically the same thing you're doing now, with the game in hand, looking at the rules going, right, how do I play?
Yeah.
So it can be a danger sometimes to get disconnected from what games in the real world are doing, what they're saying, how they're selling themselves, how they're teaching themselves. You know, so stay connected with what's coming out today, and that's the other reason I'm really looking forward to Essen. There's 1,000 games coming out of Essen.
Mm.
Some of them are going to be duds, but
Yeah.
a lot of them are going to be. Some of them will be new classics. Everyone's going to be talking about the games coming to their game cafe soon. So all that to say, I come back to the experience again.
Mm.
But what kind of experience do you want players to have, and then also allow that to shift as players say stuff.
Mm.
When playtesters are offering feedback, I've sometimes said, I feel like this game could be a little bit shorter,
Mhm.
or it could be a little bit longer, it could be a bit bigger, heavier, deeper, lighter, whatever. And obviously this is your call to make as designer, and this is your chance to kind of dial in the experience you want to create along with the experience players want to have. These can be two separate things.
Yeah, absolutely. Chris, so many wonderful insights there, mate. And I think, there are so many topics we thought we might cover tonight that in 50 minutes we haven't gotten absolutely anywhere close to. But for the next part, I'm keen to follow up from a question that my previous guest, Ryan, asked. So kind of a bit of a tradition on the show now is that guests can have the opportunity to ask me a question, pay it forward to the community, or both. So the question that Ryan posed our next guest, who of course is your good self, is what's something from your past, could be good or bad, that has shaped how you make games?
I think traveling and being a nomad has helped me understand the different perspectives people bring to life, to games. On some basic level, we as humans have some fairly basic universal desires. We want to be seen, we want to be heard, we want to feel creative, to be successful, and cultures define, and to a large extent, countries and peers and so on can define what that is. But everyone has these same sort of basic desires, and games can help you express that, or they can at least help you connect with those other humans. It's very easy to devolve into the us versus them, red versus blue, my team versus your team sort of thing. And people play games to have fun, to escape from the real world for a while, maybe to learn something, to connect with other people, to have their competitive spirit renewed, to win. If they're playing a social deduction game with their mates, to kind of bash on the guy they think is the bad guy. So, and really just understanding how different people, different experiences come to light. The thing that might be hilarious and amazing for your group isn't necessarily something that's hilarious and amazing for everyone. So remembering to take in things from different perspectives, not just people that are the same gender, the same skin color as you.
Yeah.
Look at your game from the larger perspective.
Yeah, and I think again that really comes back to the empathy comment before as well. Like try and put yourself in your players' shoes with what you want them to think, feel, and do fundamentally, right? And I think that embraces a mindset of being open, having a two ears, one mouth, embracing different cultures, embracing different points of view, embracing diversity of opinion. So, yeah, thanks so much for sharing that. It's a wonderful insight.
Yeah.
Do you have a question for me at all, Chris, as well?
For the next guest, or
either or, yeah, could be for me or could be for the next guest or could be both.
Okay. What is a theme you've never seen done in a board game that has to exist?
Theme done in a board game that I haven't seen done in a board game.
A theme you haven't yet seen done in a board game that has to exist. Someone has to make a game about this at some point.
Well, I think it's interesting. So games have since been made about this, but it's interesting. There was a thread on the Tabletop Game Designers of Australia Facebook page just recently about what's the longest game that you've been working on that you might have shelved or that you might be coming back to or whatever. One of my very earliest prototypes, the answer for me is a cricket game that I'm really hoping I can get licensed by Cricket Australia at some stage because I've got a bit of a niche to sporting IP and pop culture IP. But I think for me, I was working on a game when I was in university. This was back in 2010. I spent the best part of an 80 minutes finance lecture playing a soccer creation game I made, playing against a mate who also loves soccer/football, depending where in the world you're watching this. And it was literally like a giant chessboard, right? Where every different piece represented a different player. You had the ball there and you had to score. And it was just so obvious at the time, like, why hasn't a game been made about this before? And then when I started following the board game scene a bit more intently, I'm still reasonably new to the community now, but I think it would have been back in 2019 or 2020, I started following the Kickstarter scene just to see what type of games are coming through. And sure enough, there were probably 3 games in the space of, I want to say, a year or 18 months where they were more complicated than my idea. They had more advanced tactics with different pieces can do different things, and you can play cards that unlock certain actions and certain tactics or more advanced tackles or more advanced sprints and whatnot. Mine was pretty simple. You were either a quick player where you could move 5 squares, or you're a slower player where you could move 3 and you could kick the ball 8 maybe, or lesser players would kick the ball 6. But that kind of, I guess, sports simulation, I was really surprised back in university that nothing like that existed, or nothing scalable existed like that. And that there seemed to be a bit more of that stuff coming through Kickstarter now. I know there's been a couple of different iterations of hockey games as well. I can't, the name of the game that escapes me. So I think that it's maybe a bit of a cheat answer to your question because those games do now exist. But yeah, sports simulations, or not even simulations of sporting games, but something that looks to popularize an aspect of the sport, be it my game is largely this scoring aspect of football and hopefully in time American football and also soccer as well, how that can come through. So yeah, that's an area that I've always been intrigued by, that it feels like there's a few more test and learns coming into the market. So it's not quite completely white space maybe, but I've always been intrigued that something as scalable as sports and board games, that overlap in the Venn diagram, is it too small to warrant going down the development path, or is it actually white space that for whatever reason hasn't been connected yet together?
I think there's definitely been, one challenge might be with some sports you have licenses and IP considerations that have to be figured in. Obviously, if you want to use someone's name, image, likeness, there are deals for that. The rules of the sport can't be copyrighted, but some of the more mundane elements might have legal issues that come into play. The number of folks that enjoy watching a sport versus enjoy playing a sport, there's a pretty disparate ratio between that. And someone that might enjoy watching the real sport might enjoy it for different reasons than the reasons they might play a board game. I might enjoy watching the replays of some classic tackle or some classic fake out or some move that happened. I might have the story of the comeback, the underdog winning against the champion or whatever. So we tap into some of these universal storylines in sports. Today's producers often call them human interest stories, but we come back to those feelings you have as a sports observer that are different from the feelings a board game offers. Sometimes they're similar, and sometimes the board game can tap into those because of the way that they play, because of the catch-up mechanisms or the simplicity. Turning a sports watcher into a board game player, or vice versa. I mean, as you said, this is a Venn diagram, and I do think there is a crossover there. One question for you specifically: how has the Aussie board game scene changed or evolved over the last few years? What's different there now?
Great question. I'll also pay that one forward to the community, I think, because I'm still pretty new to the community, I think, mate. But I think that I've been really encouraged by just how welcoming it is. And I was at this event on Saturday, and genuinely a lot of us were meeting each other for the first time, but we all wanted to hear more about each other's projects. We're all genuinely interested in giving back, sharing what, bite-sized level of expertise we all have that may be relevant for each other's projects. A real sharing of constructive feedback. So, some designers we're practicing our own pitches for those who are looking to showcase different concepts at PAX that's upcoming. And again, there was nothing like you were rubbish here or rip your game to shreds. There's no way you should be showcasing that in 3 weeks' time. It was all, I like this aspect, maybe think about doing this differently, or I found this really hard to follow. So, maybe think about how you can reframe that. So I think that we have a really vibrant and diverse board game culture here that has probably pleasantly taken me by surprise. I attended PAX last year with my wife as just an attendees on the third day, and we were pretty blown away by how big the scene is. So I think that's probably the biggest, not necessarily evolution because I have nothing to compare it against, but I've been pleasantly surprised by its size and just how welcoming the community's been to me. And so I can only hope that continues to grow and that mindset of helping others only continues to be nurtured and fostered.
Oh, yeah. And a lot of that comes back to the people on the scene, the people leading it, the examples that are shown. And yeah, that's a good sign. For folks that might be wondering how you go from hobby to profession, I come back to offering value.
Yes.
I started writing blog posts about different things. When everyone needed to go to Tabletop Simulator, I wrote a post on I think it was called The Absolute Beginner's Guide to Tabletop Simulator. It was a pretty detailed, in-depth guide that I had. Now, I had experience in blogging and writing from travel blogging as a nomad, so I already knew how to do some of that stuff. Whatever your experience in life has called you, has helped you create at this point, there is probably a tie-in to board games in some way. A good example, one of the guys at last week's playtest, he's in insurance. And I was like, okay, so let's drill down there. What sort of insurance do you do? Oh, well, I'm an actuary. Okay. Now, put on your board game design hat for a minute. What you think you know about an actuary? They're a mathy person that uses spreadsheets. Can you see any way to use a math-based spreadsheet person? Use that. How could you create value with that? If that's your skill set, if it's something you know how to do well, maybe you help people design their spreadsheets. Maybe you help balance people's games. This guy can probably run a Monte Carlo scenario in his sleep while you're like, what's a Monte Carlo scenario? So he knows his way around this tool or this system that you don't. So maybe you pay him a few bucks to get some of that knowledge. Maybe he consults to show you how to set up a great spreadsheet. If you've done work with manufacturing, with materials, you might know what certain materials can do, how they can be formed, what is more expensive, what's more cheap. So basically it comes back to something that's kind of cliche, but it really does come back to offering value. What can you create or offer that people need enough to pay you for? I started doing consulting based on years of experience. I also, when I started tabletoppublishers.com, this is me providing value, but this is also me scratching my own itch. I had been collecting this large database of publishers that I wanted to pitch and so on. And over time, I heard in the Facebook groups, people were complaining, oh man, I just don't know who to pitch. I don't know if there's any publishers out there worth pitching. And I was like, man, there's hundreds of them out there. Where are you looking? What are you seeing? And then I realized, well, there are lists out there, but they suck. They weren't that great. They weren't updated or whatever. So, so creating value for someone else necessitates having something valuable to offer. With no box games, the whole goal was print and play games, no assembly required. We're now publishers, for instance. And that started from a desire to create value from the games without getting into some of the logistical issues that come from manufacturing and shipping and whatever. So we started from a business need that was also a way to create games more quickly, to get games into people's hands more quickly. Once the Kickstarter's done and the cards are charged, we can get games into people's hands, that same week.
Yeah.
So professionals do business.
Yeah.
And the board game business is an industry, many billions of dollars of money are changing hands. So getting comfortable with this creative thing as being put in a box, having a price tag on it, being sold in stores, I think this is part and parcel of the process. At some point, the creative hobby side begins to make way or give way to the cold, hard reality of business. And that sounds like these are two different worlds. And they merge pretty successfully. But at the end of the day, most board games, any board game you've ever gone into a shop, picture what you do with it. You pick it up, you look at the art, you go, wow, that's some cool art. And then do you go, okay, I'm just going to go pay $70 right now. This is some amazing art on the front. That's all I need. Job done. Let's go.
Yeah.
If that happens for you, then bravo. For most people, they'll flip it over, they'll look at the back of the box, they'll see what kind of components, they'll read about the story or the blurbs, they'll try to get a sense of whether they have a game like this already. And whether they say it or not, they're asking themselves, do I already have a game providing this experience?
Is value to me. Yeah.
Yeah. So, I've already got 5 worker placement games at home. What is this worker placement game going to offer that these 5 of the games I have don't? Or someone's like, I really want to have, I want to have a short, simple game I can teach friends, and I don't have one of those yet.
Yeah.
So you ask the guy at the front of the local game store, can you show me a game that's simple, easy to teach? And they will recommend game X, game Y, game Z, and things go from there.
Yeah.
So, if you would like to become a professional in the world of board games, create value and accept that this is a creativity for money environment.
Chris, I think that's a wonderful insight to close on, really. And I think that's almost a bit of a full circle with how you both started off in the hobby, all the value that you've added and continue to add to the community, and what you strive to do, really. I think just coming back to that compass of adding value, but also being comfortable in the fact that you're going to have to wear different hats. You're going to have to wear a business hat. So if you get a bit intimidated by that, then think about, well, what's either your learning curve or how you're going to outsource that. I would encourage learning curve first before outsourcing business, given that you need to make sure that it's a business that provides a return on your time, not just a return on your capital. And we didn't even talk about actually selling your game at conventions before, but also you spoke about when you were talking about Nuremberg and Essen coming up, that for now you're going into a big pitching mode where you're doing a lot of sell sheets, and after that you'll go into designing mode again. So just understanding that value pivots and changes. Pivot's such a cliche, COVID cliche, but value changes depending on what phase of the project that you're in. But you need a lot of different skill sets in order to make a business of this, to ultimately make this your main vocation, as opposed to a side hobby or hustle, as it is for a lot of us.
And one thing to think about here, the book What Color is Your Parachute talked about the equation they called A plus B equals C. So C was this long list of stuff you need to do or stuff you need to know. And A is the stuff from that list that you can do. It's a subset. So if I want to publish a board game myself, if I want to self-publish on Kickstarter, I need to know, how do I set up a business bank account? How do I run a Kickstarter page? How do I create a Kickstarter page? And you might say, okay, from this list of things, I can do this thing, this thing, this thing.
Yeah.
And so what this leaves are things I don't yet know how to do.
Yeah.
And so from this middle column, this B column, I might go, should I learn how to do this? Should I pay someone else to do this for me? Is it, or do I find someone that can do parts of this for me? When when I had the idea for No Box Games, I recognized that marketing wasn't really my strong suit.
Mm-hmm.
And while my graphic design is certainly fine for prototypes, it's not up to the professional level yet.
Mm.
So what I did was I went out and I wanted to find a graphic design person who is the amazing rock star Christian Foch,
Mm-hmm.
and an amazing marketing person, which is Rocky De Leon. So the three of us started No Box Games.
Mm-hmm.
And as a trio, we have a Facebook chat where we can bounce ideas off of each other and talk about the different elements that we're doing. We each kind of have our own departments of things to do.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, a publishing company can start from one person, but that means everything's on you to make it all come together. If you can find, one, two, maybe three or four other people that can buy into your vision, or if you buy into someone else's vision, hey, I'd love to make this game and I need some help doing ... You can be on the service provider side of things or the service requester side of things.
Mm.
And you might even do this in two different ways with the same person. I might be working with Bill over here. Bill's made the game, and I'm helping him develop it.
Mm-hmm.
And in exchange for that, no money needs change hands here. I've already made a game, and Bill is doing the graphic design in my game. So that becomes a service exchange. No money changing hands, but you're getting the thing you need from the other person.
Absolutely.
Totally valid way to go.
Yeah. You can be each other's both A and each other's B in order to complete the
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And if you find that if you can't find something, then there's a world of freelancers out there to find and to use. This is a great example where networking, the Facebook groups, the cons are great for that. Anyone that's a freelancer at a local con, PAX is going to have a bunch of artists, I bet.
Yeah.
You need to find an artist. Those are a great place to see their style. They're going to have their portfolio out on display. Pick up some cards.
Yeah, 100%. No, very true. Again, Chris, thanks so much for sharing so many wonderful insights tonight. I normally try and recap very succinctly at the end of the episode,
Yes.
But this might be quite challenging. I think that probably at first, I think because there's so much gold in a good way. But I think for me, the first real light bulb moment for me tonight was how you approach each playtest differently, but how you use playtesting as a way of accelerating your development curve. The whole idea that and with your experience, now when something systematically needs changing versus, it's feedback of one that you think, oh, it's an opinion, but it's not necessarily there. But then how you then approach playtesting quite systematically multiple times per week, even multiple times per month, as a way of accelerating your development curve. And then that went into prioritization. And I know that we spoke about deadlines, but I think for me, the killer insight there is, especially if you're doing it on your own, like you need to be setting deadlines that progress it forward to stimulate your motivation. Because if you're not moving forward, then you're procrastinating and you're going backwards, and then that reacts as a deflationary tool rather than as a motivating tool. So again, for everybody listening in and watching, find what those milestones are that can propel that motivation going forward. By the same time, they have to be realistic milestones. They can't be, ripping up a whole version of a game and relaunching it 3 days later, because that's unrealistic, and that will deflate your motivation, not increase it. But I thought just how you overall set goals and set deadlines to propel the game forward, is a really important thread. That then linked into then the actual game itself, the actual goalpost for the game. And you spoke about Pirates on the Seven Seas versus the Vikings exploring the Arctic. And I think, again, it's having a really crystallized idea of what do you want your game to be, then how does that flow back into both the mechanics of how the game works and the strategic competencies. I loved both of those two frame-ups for how the game works, but then how the game plays, and what type of strategies do you want your players to have, how complex or how simple do you want that learning loop to be, and then fundamentally how that plays into the experience. I think that whenever you're describing thinkings and feelings in particular, it can be a bit hard and the stomach sometimes goes into knots, but being able to put labels onto what do you want your players to feel, and some of the words you mentioned was you want them to be frustrated, or you want them to be competitive, or you want them to get excited, or you want them to feel pumped. Like actually take the time to write down those words, because then it provides you with something that you can really assess in real time, right? If somebody's disengaged on their phone, that body language is really poor, then if you want them to be excited and frustrated, then they might be frustrated for the wrong reasons if they're on their
Yeah,
phone. So,
yeah. Yeah, and one thing that also comes to mind, I'm picturing every time, like when you play games, even if you're not playing games with playtesters, when you play a game, if you have any one-player games or if you want to play them, two-handed or whatever, um, this is a great chance for you to do this introspectively as well. Focus on your
mm,
feelings. How are you
mm,
feeling playing someone else's game? It's hard to ask
absolutely.
someone else what they're thinking if you're not quite sure how to do it yourself.
100%. I think that's that learning in the industry, isn't it? Really, that you even said that play new games to keep your skills fresh. Like reflect on what those feelings are, what resonates with yourself. You might then want to create a game that creates those similar feelings for others. That you enjoy getting satisfaction playing a game yourself. It could be different, but just
Exactly.
keep playing those games to continue going, continuing that skill set. I think that probably there's a lot more even from the last kind of 15 or 20 minutes as well, but even just that approach to cons, I guess, and how to teach games and framing up the who, the where, the when, the what the objective is, and then how the game works, and then getting into that structure. Focus on the core loops, don't focus on absolutely everything. Make sure you're providing that context, otherwise you'll lose your players. I think is a really valuable one for all of us as we're approaching con season, be it down under here in Australia or a couple of the big European ones that are taking place over the next few months. So yeah, thanks again, Chris, for sharing so much of your varied
Yeah, you're
insights
welcome.
over the journey, and you keep contributing back to the community in so many ways. I really appreciate you sharing some more pearls of wisdom with our small but
Yeah,
growing audience here this evening.
yeah. Thanks for having me. And yeah, if anyone wants to check out more of my stuff, I'm at entrogames.com, ENTRO games. The publishing side of thing, the noboxgames.com, and the tabletoppublishers.com is the 500 plus publishers database. You can sort, search, filter, and the whole goal here is to make pitching easier.
Fantastic. Well, thanks again, guys. Certainly check out those links. Thank again, Chris, for his contributions this evening into our broader community. Again, if you're liking the content that I'm putting together, please hit subscribe. Still very amateur quality. We don't have thumbnails or anything like that just yet, but hopefully the content that we're producing is of great value and you're listening in. Constructive feedback, would love to hear it. Great comments, would still love to see them as well. So thanks again for tuning in as always, and look forward to seeing you next time.